Imagine a single city that rose from a cluster of huts on the banks of the Tiber River into the most powerful empire the world had ever seen. Rome was not built in a day. But in just a few centuries it conquered lands stretching from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to Mesopotamia. Yet, just as quickly as it rose, it collapsed into chaos, leaving behind ruins and legends. Today, we explore the astonishing story of the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, a tale of ambition, glory, betrayal, and inevitable decline. The Roman Empire has fascinated humanity for more than 2,000 years. It shaped our laws, languages, architecture, and even the way we think about power. But how did it rise from a backwater kingdom into a global superpower? And why did it ultimately fall, shattering into fragments that would shape medieval Europe? In this documentary, we will travel through the 7 ages of Rome, from its mythical founding to its golden age under emperors like Augustus, to the crisis that tore it apart. Along the way, we will uncover the lessons that still echo in our world today. Every great story begins with a myth. For Rome, that myth was the tale of Romulus and Remus, twin brothers raised by a she-wolf who fought to establish a city. Romulus, after killing his brother, became the first king of Rome. Whether true or not, this legend gave Romans a sense of divine destiny. They were not just another tribe, they were chosen, born of the gods, destined for greatness. By 509 BCE, Rome transformed from monarchy into a republic. Power was no longer in the hands of a single king, but shared among senators, magistrates. But citizens. This was the birth of Roman politics, messy, competitive, and often violent. Rome's rise was fueled by relentless ambition. First, they conquered neighboring tribes in Italy. Then came the great challenge, Carthage, a mighty trading empire in North Africa. The Punic Wars between Rome and Carthage would last more than a century. The most famous chapter came when Hannibal, the Carthaginian general, crossed the Alps with war elephants to strike at Rome itself. Against all odds, Rome endured. By 146 BCE, Carthage was destroyed. Its fields were said to be salted so nothing would grow again. Rome had no equal in the Mediterranean. But with victory came arrogance. Wealth flooded into the city, widening the gap between rich and poor, and sowing seeds of corruption that would later prove fatal. The Republic, once proud of its citizen soldiers and civic virtue, began to collapse under greed, civil war, and the ambitions of powerful generals like Julius Caesar. Out of this chaos emerged a new order, the Roman Empire. Led by Augustus, Rome entered its golden age, an age of unmatched power and prosperity. By the 1st century BCE, the Roman Republic was no longer a humble collection of citizen soldiers defending their homeland. It had become a vast, wealthy empire in all but name, ruling over Spain, Greece, North Africa, and parts of Asia Minor. But behind the marble temples and bustling marketplaces, the Republic was breaking apart. The spoils of conquest had made Rome powerful, but they also corrupted its institutions. Senators grew rich from provinces they exploited. Ordinary soldiers, once loyal to the state, became loyal to ambitious generals who promised them land and glory. Political rivalries turned violent. Rome teetered on the edge of chaos. Into this storm stepped Julius Caesar. Caesar was a brilliant general, a master politician, and above all, a man who believed Rome could no longer be governed by squabbling senators. Through alliances, charm, and sheer military genius, he rose to power, winning victories in Gaul and expanding Rome's borders to the Atlantic Ocean. His triumphs made him beloved by the people but feared by the Senate. In 49 BCE, when ordered to give up his command, Caesar instead crossed the Rubicon River with his army, a direct act of war against the Republic itself. Civil war erupted. Within a few years, Caesar stood victorious, the absolute master of Rome. In 44 BCE, he declared himself dictator for life. But absolute power came at a price. Many senators feared that Caesar was destroying the Republic, replacing it with monarchy. On the Ides of March, March 15, 44 BCE, Caesar entered the Senate. He was surrounded by conspirators, including men he considered friends. With daggers concealed under their robes, they struck. Caesar was stabbed 23 times. His final words, according to legend, were, "Et tu, Brute." Even you, Brutus? The dictator fell. And with him, the fragile illusion that the Republic could survive. Caesar's assassination plunged Rome into another civil war. His heir, Octavian, along with generals like Mark Antony, battled for control. In 31 BCE, Octavian defeated Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium. Now, there was no rival left. Octavian took the name Augustus. And in 27 BCE, the Roman Empire was officially born. Though the Senate still existed, real power rested with Augustus. He was careful to call himself first citizen, not king, but make no mistake, Rome was now ruled by an emperor. Under Augustus, Rome entered the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. For nearly 2 centuries, the empire experienced stability, prosperity, and expansion. Roads stretched across Europe and Asia. Aqueducts carried water to great cities. Roman law and language spread, leaving a legacy still alive today. At its height, Rome was the superpower of the ancient world, unmatched in wealth, culture, and military might. But even in this golden age, shadows loomed. Absolute power made emperors targets for assassination. Corruption never truly disappeared. And on the distant frontiers, new threats were growing. Rome at its height was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Imagine a city of marble temples, grand amphitheaters, bustling marketplaces, and roads that stretched farther than any traveller could hope to walk. From the chilly forests of Britannia to the deserts of Egypt, all roads led to Rome. The reign of Augustus ushered in the Pax Romana, or Roman peace, a period of nearly 200 years during which the empire experienced relative stability and prosperity. Wars still occurred, but for most Roman citizens, this was an age of flourishing trade, art. But infrastructure. Roman engineers built roads that connected the empire's vast territories, enabling legions to march swiftly and merchants to transport goods. The saying, "all roads lead to Rome," was not just poetic, it was literal. Aqueducts carried fresh water into cities, while public baths became centers of both hygiene and social life. The Colosseum, completed under Emperor Vespasian and his son Titus, showcased Rome's wealth and brutality. Gladiators fought to the death, wild animals were released from cages, and the people were entertained with spectacles that reinforced Rome's dominance. At its peak around the 2nd century CE, the Roman Empire stretched over 5 million square kilometers and ruled nearly 60 million people. This made Rome not just powerful, but also incredibly diverse. Greeks, Egyptians, Gauls, Britons, Syrians, and countless other peoples became part of this vast imperial system. Roman citizenship, once exclusive, was gradually extended. By 212 CE, Emperor Caracalla granted citizenship to nearly all free men within the empire. This created a sense of shared identity, yet it also blurred the boundaries between Romans and their conquered subjects. For the elite, life in Rome was luxurious. Senators and wealthy merchants lived in lavish villas adorned with mosaics and marble statues. They attended feasts that lasted hours, where exotic foods like peacock tongues and hunted dormice were served. For ordinary citizens, life was simpler but still connected to the grandeur of Rome. The government provided free grain to the poor, ensuring loyalty. Public entertainment, gladiator games, theatre, and chariot races in the Circus Maximus kept the masses distracted. The phrase bread and circuses became a symbol of how emperors maintained control. Yet, beneath this glittering surface, poverty, disease, and inequality still plagued the empire. Slavery was rampant. Millions of people lived and died in bondage, working in households, farms, and mines. Rome's greatness came at a human cost. Even in this golden age, cracks began to appear. Maintaining such a vast empire was costly. The legions had to guard frontiers stretching thousands of miles. Rebellions simmered in Judea, Britain, and North Africa. Emperors became increasingly paranoid and dependent on the loyalty of the army. Power shifted with the sword. If legions declared their general emperor, civil war often followed. This cycle of violence would become more frequent in the centuries ahead. Still, for now, Rome stood as the shining superpower of the ancient world. To outsiders, it seemed invincible. But history has taught us, no empire is eternal. Every empire has a breaking point. For Rome, that moment came not from a single battle or invasion, but from within. Greed, corruption, civil wars, and economic chaos tore at the empire's foundation. The glory of Rome began to crack, revealing the fragility of its power. Between 235 and 284 CE, Rome entered one of its darkest chapters, the crisis of the 3rd century. In less than 50 years, Rome saw over 25 emperors rise and fall, most of them murdered, overthrown, or killed in battle. Loyalty meant little in this age. Generals proclaimed themselves emperors, soldiers demanded bribes for their support, and assassinations became the fastest path to power. It was a game of survival, not governance. The empire, once held together by discipline and order, was now torn apart by rival armies fighting each other instead of defending Rome's borders. The endless civil wars drained Rome's treasury. To pay soldiers and keep the empire functioning, emperors debased the currency, mixing cheaper metals into silver coins. Inflation soared. A loaf of bread that once cost a handful of coins now required bags full. Ordinary people suffered while corrupt officials enriched themselves. Trade routes became unsafe, production slowed, and famine spread. Rome, once the wealthiest superpower on earth, was now on the verge of bankruptcy. As Rome weakened, enemies took their chance. The Goths invaded from the north, the Persians threatened from the east, and Germanic tribes pushed across the Rhine and Danube rivers. In 260 CE, Emperor Valerian suffered one of Rome's most humiliating defeats. He was captured alive by the Persian king Shapur I. Valerian spent the rest of his life as a prisoner, reportedly used as a human footstool before being executed. This shocking humiliation showed the world that Rome was no longer invincible. Adding to the chaos, a devastating plague, possibly smallpox or measles, swept through the empire, killing millions. Entire cities were emptied, farmlands were abandoned, and military strength declined. The once endless supply of Roman manpower was dwindling, leaving the empire increasingly vulnerable to outside threats. By the late 3rd century, one man tried to restore order, Emperor Diocletian. He recognized that the empire was simply too vast to be ruled by one man alone. His solution was radical. He divided the empire into the eastern and western halves, each with its own ruler. This system, known as the Tetrarchy, temporarily brought stability. Diocletian also introduced strict laws, fixed prices, and reformed the military. For a time, the bleeding slowed. But the division of Rome would have consequences. The Eastern Empire, centered in Byzantium, later Constantinople, would grow wealthier and more secure, while the Western Empire weakened further. The stage was set for Rome's ultimate fall. The crisis of the 3rd century revealed a painful truth. Rome's greatness was built on fragile foundations. Its vast size, its dependence on conquest, and its reliance on military loyalty made it vulnerable. Rome had survived the storm, for now. But the empire that once ruled the known world was no longer the same. The cracks had become impossible to ignore. In 306 CE, after years of bloody power struggles, a new leader emerged, Constantine the Great. He would become one of the most influential emperors in Roman history, not just for his military victories, but for reshaping the empire's spiritual foundation. Constantine was a skilled general, but also a visionary politician. At the famous Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312 CE, he reportedly saw a vision, a glowing cross in the sky, with the words in this sign, "You will conquer." Taking it as a divine omen, Constantine ordered his soldiers to paint the Christian symbol on their shields. Against the odds, he won the battle, securing his place as emperor. In 313 CE, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, declaring religious tolerance across the empire. For the first time, Christians, who had endured centuries of persecution, torture, and martyrdom, could openly worship without fear. This moment changed history. Christianity, once a forbidden sect, became not just tolerated but eventually the dominant religion of the empire. The faith of fishermen, slaves, and outcasts now shaped emperors, laws, and culture. Constantine recognized that Rome itself was no longer the best place to rule such a vast empire. The western half was weakening, plagued by invasions and economic decline. The east, however, was rich, strategically placed, and easier to defend. So in 330 CE, Constantine founded a new capital in the east, Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul. Positioned between Europe and Asia, it became a fortress of wealth, trade, and military strength. This decision further cemented the divide between the Eastern Roman Empire and the Western Roman Empire. Over time, the East would thrive while the West crumbled. Constantine's embrace of Christianity was more than personal, it was political. By supporting the Church, he gained unity in a divided empire. Bishops and clergy became powerful advisors. Churches were built across the empire. And the faith spread rapidly. In 325 CE, Constantine convened the Council of Nicaea, where church leaders gathered to define key doctrines, including the nature of Christ and the foundation of Christian belief. The Nicene Creed, born from this council, remains central to Christianity today. What began as a persecuted faith was now entwined with imperial power. Christianity would shape not only the empire but the entire course of Western civilization. While the East prospered, the West continued to decline. Rome itself was decaying, its population shrinking, its economy crumbling, and its military increasingly reliant on foreign mercenaries who had little loyalty to the empire. The division created by Diocletian and reinforced by Constantine became permanent. The Eastern Roman Empire, later known as the Byzantine Empire, would last for another 1,000 years. The Western Roman Empire, however, was nearing its breaking point. Constantine died in 337 CE, baptized on his deathbed. His reign marked the transformation of Rome from a pagan empire of conquest to a Christian empire of faith. But his reforms also deepened the divide that would eventually doom the West. His new capital ensured the East would survive, but left Rome itself increasingly vulnerable. After Constantine, the Western Empire stumbled from one weak emperor to another. Civil wars, barbarian invasions, and economic collapse continued to erode its power. The glory days of Rome were now a fading memory. The stage was set for the empire's final act: invasions, collapse, and the end of an era. By the 4th and 5th centuries, the Western Roman Empire was surrounded by enemies. Germanic tribes like the Visigoths, Vandals, and Ostrogoths pressed against the borders. The once mighty Roman legions, weakened by decades of civil war and corruption, could no longer defend the empire as they once had. Rome's leaders faced an impossible reality: the empire was too large, too fragile, and too divided to stand forever. One of the most critical moments came in 378 CE at the Battle of Adrianople, when the Eastern Roman army faced the Visigoths. The Romans, arrogant and unprepared, underestimated their opponents. The result was catastrophic. Emperor Valens was killed in battle, and 2/3 of his army was annihilated. Adrianople proved that Rome was no longer invincible. For the first time, barbarian armies had decisively crushed Roman legions on Roman soil. But the real rot came from inside. Senators and elites lived in luxury while ordinary citizens starved. Taxation was crushing, bribery was rampant, and the government grew weaker with every generation. Worse still, Rome increasingly relied on mercenaries, hired soldiers from the very tribes threatening the empire. These mercenaries fought for gold, not loyalty, and often turned on their employers when payments failed. The empire, once bound by discipline and civic duty, was now hollowed out by greed and corruption. In 410 CE, the unimaginable happened. The Visigoth king Alaric led his army into Italy and laid siege to Rome itself. After months of hunger and fear, the gates were opened. For the first time in nearly 800 years, the Eternal City was sacked. The world was stunned. Pagans claimed it was punishment for abandoning the old gods. Christians insisted it was a trial of faith. Either way, the myth of Rome's invincibility was shattered. Just a few decades later, in 455 CE, Rome suffered another devastating blow. The Vandals, sailing from North Africa, stormed into the city and looted it for 2 full weeks. Even Rome's churches and holy sites were stripped bare. The word vandalism comes from this event, a lasting reminder of Rome's humiliation. By the late 5th century, the Western Empire was little more than a shadow. Its armies were weak, its economy ruined, and its emperors powerless. In 476 CE, a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer deposed the last emperor of the West, Romulus Augustulus, a boy barely into his teens. With no resistance, the Western Roman Empire officially collapsed. The Senate sent the imperial regalia east, acknowledging the emperor in Constantinople as the sole ruler. The Western Empire was gone, leaving behind ruins, legends, and a legacy that would shape Europe for centuries. While the West fell, the Eastern Roman Empire, centered in Constantinople, continued to thrive. Known later as the Byzantine Empire, it preserved Roman law, culture, and Christian faith for another 1,000 years until the fall of Constantinople in 1453. In a way, Rome never truly died. It simply transformed, passing its legacy into the hands of new powers. So why does Rome's fall still capture our imagination? Because it is a mirror. Rome shows us that no matter how powerful, no empire is immune to corruption, division, or decay. Its rise reminds us of ambition's heights, and its fall warns us of pride's dangers. Even today, governments, nations, and leaders look back at Rome, sometimes to learn, sometimes to repeat its mistakes. Rome may have fallen in 476, but in culture, language, law, religion, but architecture, Rome lives on. It is not simply a story of loss, but of transformation, how one empire's end became the foundation for the world we live in today. And that, my friends, is the story of Rome, an empire that rose with unmatched ambition, ruled the known world for centuries, and fell under the weight of its own corruption, greed, and division. But Rome never truly disappeared. It lives on in our laws, in our languages, in our architecture, and even in the very idea of empire itself. If this story of Rome's rise and fall made you think, and imagine what other secrets of history are waiting to be uncovered. That's what we do here. We go beyond the surface, into the what ifs and the untold truths of the past. So, if you want to keep exploring history's greatest mysteries with me, don't forget to subscribe. Leave a comment on what part of Rome's story fascinated you most. Share this video with someone who loves history as much as you do. Because history is more than names and dates, it's the story of us. And together, we'll keep bringing the past to life.